to our weekly cybersecurity and GRC article review, where we share cutting edge analysis of current articles that brings to our attention the need for effective cybersecurity risk management practices. Microsoft warns that China hackers attacked US infrastructure. That's the headline of an article published on Wednesday, March 24th, 2023 by CNBC. And I will drop in a link to this article shortly in the chat for you guys to follow along in our conversation and to share in this conversation today and provide their expert analysis of this article. We have Jonathan Fisher, Paul Robbins, and Chris Carter. So, guys, welcome as usual for being a part of our conversation. And important is the fact that Paul was interviewed by Rochester to provide expert analysis on this particular incident. So, guys, we are definitely in for no doubt a great conversation as it relates to this article. And just to quickly give you a few pointers as it relates to the article itself, it says that Chinese state-sponsored hackers have compromised critical cyber infrastructure in a variety of industries, including government and communications organizations, Microsoft said Wednesday. Secondly, the hacking group is codenamed Volt Typhoon and has been in operation since 2021. And lastly, impacted parties have already been notified. So those are some of the main points coming out of this particular article. And there are a number of questions that have been risen from this incident that we seek to address. And as we go along, for sure, definitely be hearing a lot of those coming out from this article. So, Paul, can you give us a quick take on the article? Then, for sure, address the question of what are the implications of such types of attack at a national level, and possibly also include small, medium, and enterprise business organizations.
Yeah, when news like this comes out, it's important to break these things down into layman's terms so the general public can understand it. We're all security professionals here, so we can kind of read a little bit more deeper into the things that are going on. But for our group and for people that want more information on something like this, it's important to understand that this is considered cyber warfare. So when we talk about warfare, a war is fought, a war is won by eliminating people and eliminating critical resources to overpower your opponent. And it's important to understand that cyber warfare is no different than physical warfare. It is trying to eliminate people and to overpower resources to gain victory. And that's the severity of this, of what's going on. The trickle down effect of what we're talking about here, it impacts everybody. So if you're a small business, you're like, okay, China's going after the grid. I'm not a grid. I'm a manufacturing company. I don't have anything to worry about. Let me take you briefly through the trickle down effect of what's going on. So one of the, it was power grids and telecommunications. So those were the two major things that were at risk here that are vulnerable. So in research, an actual taking down of a grid or telecommunications averages about 2 weeks of not being able to recover. So imagine being in this country without access to electricity, phone, and internet for 2 weeks. And it's not as simple as, oh well, I'll just light a candle, or I could do without TikTok for 2 weeks. It's really not like that. But think of all the services that we are reliant on for that. If the electricity is out, then medicines cannot be refrigerated that need to be refrigerated. If the electricity is out, you have chaos in the street with street lights and things of that nature. If you can't communicate, if your internet is down, how reliant are we every day on the internet for just basic services or telecommunications? If God forbid there's a fire that breaks out on my block, my first thing that I do is I call 911. Imagine not being able to converse with 911 on that. So these types of threats, these types of vulnerabilities that are out there are things that we all need to take care of, a careful look at But there's also, we can't go to the extremes. We live in these worlds of extremes of where, it's like, oh, nothing's going to happen to me, or, I'm going to lay in my bed and I'm going to put the covers over my head and, hide from everything. I think it's pragmatically vigilant is what we need to do. And this kind of goes on what we've talked about in prior interviews of being cyber resilient, coming up with a plan. If God forbid some of these services were to go down, how do you survive? How do you survive and live life as best as you can until services come back up from that? But yeah, that's my initial thought.
Those are very important points that you have actually mentioned there, and for sure, um, Chris definitely would like to pitch in at this point in time to share also his take on this um, important issue that we're dealing with.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it's it's a matter it's a matter of national security, right? When you have a critical piece of your infrastructure that has either been damaged or is not available, right? The implications are far-reaching. Reason being, we're an advanced nation, and this is just for the U.S., right? You have which is you're reliant on these things. The first thing that came to my mind was what happens to people in hospitals who are on ventilators, who, right? Obviously, they have an uninterrupted power system, but how long can that last, right? You start disrupting people's lives in ways that they never imagined. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I honestly believe that when you look at advanced persistent threat actors such as China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they're coming, right? They're highly motivated, they're highly trained, and they have the resources behind them to carry out these types of attacks. And as I was reading this article, I thought back of the OPM incident that happened, I think, back in the mid tens, right? This is just a part, from my perspective, it's a part of a larger strategy by China, right? I think in 1949, Mao Zedong came up with an idea, right? In 100 years, China will become a superpower. And when that's how I look at this. And from that perspective, I think it's just a part of a larger strategy by the Chinese government to surpass the United States. If you're inside of a country's critical infrastructure, then you do have leverage, right? You could use that for bargaining. You could use that for negotiating. You could use that for many different reasons. Just the fact that you could use it's psychological warfare too, right? The fact that I know that you're in my house or you're here, it's going to cause a lot of dissonance in my head. So just looking at it from many different angles, um, it's yes, psychologically, it's very jarring. And as a professional or as professionals, right? We're talking right now. If something were to happen, this thing is over, right? You're left on your own, Rich, because you're somewhere else. But that's how serious it is.
Yeah, that for sure. Those are definitely very valid points that you have all mentioned. I mean, when we really analyze and look at the depth of this incident, I mean, on the surface level, it might seem not so maybe critical for certain countries in that they are not directly impacted, but for sure, when it relates to that, I mean, international trading, there are so many interrelatedness that can actually be impacted, as you have mentioned, life, trade, commerce, so many things. I mean, unemployment, a lot of ripple effects, which speaks to the fact that as security professionals within the industry, regardless of whether you are at the highest level in terms of at a government level where you have all the resources, it speaks to the fact that none of us are exempt from what can actually happen. So it drives that seriousness of actually doing all that is within our power to ensure that we are operating as securely as possible. And in light of this, there are so many questions that are actually going through many persons' mind in terms of how it is that this actually happened, when did this start, and so many questions. And for sure, there are many opinions and I mean view on all of this, but as we go along, for sure, we'll definitely be getting into further details. So, Jonathan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed what's been shared by both Chris and Paul and yourself. Um, you know, when I look back in my life, I've kind of had points where all this stuff has happened to me, right? I've spent over 2 decades in the military, so I know what warfare is like, right? I've been to different places, so I know what it feels like to feel that you're being attacked, and how you need to defend yourself. And are we as security professionals doing our best that we can? I'd say we are. But there's only so much that as security professionals we can do without getting good buy-in from higher level leadership, and employees to understand what we need to do, to have good cyber hygiene, to make sure that we're not inviting these threat actors in. Sometimes we can't avoid it. Uh, there's ways that these threat actors are very advanced. As technology gets better, so do they. No one's really going after the old type of encryption attacks anymore, just because it's not valid anymore. So I mean, our systems are still under attack, but we also still have good tools that are doing it. We just need to make sure we're paying attention to how we're using those tools. I love how Paul talked about what would it be like to be without power if a critical infrastructure got hit, right? I was in Texas a few years ago when they called the snowpocalypse or whatever it was that hit and took down the whole system pretty much in Texas. I spent about a week without power. Almost once I got power back, I lost water. The pipes cracked, and it was very eye-awakening to see what life is like when you're trying to fight to have basic necessities for your family. All right, trying to keep them warm. It was winter time. It was January. Normally, winter time in Texas in Central Texas is very mild, but that year, we got pretty low into the teens. There's actually ice on the road, so all hell went crazy out there. But trying to keep them safe, trying to make food, understand how prepared are you. And we can take life events like that, like how prepared would you be if the power went out, if you lost water, how long could you survive? And apply that into your cyber life. Like if you were to do something that could disrupt your network, your company's network, how long could you survive before you really started feeling those effects? I think that's something that, not just security professionals, but everyone needs to start thinking in their mind of what are they doing? How resilient are they helping, or how are they helping to keep their systems resilient and try to avoid these attacks as much as possible?
Very great points there, for sure, that you have actually mentioned, Jonathan. And as you spoke about those issues, then it sends my mind in so many areas. This is going beyond just thinking about technical things, firewalls, and all of these things. This goes beyond. It's a holistic. There are so many pieces of things that are actually coming into play. It for many persons it might seem very simple, or it's a case of you don't have water or you don't have power. But when you're actually in the situation and know the value of having your eating, I mean, your HVAC systems in place, all of these, and not having those resources, then persons who are in the situation and definitely know the impact and the effect of what can actually happen. So, Paul, can you share a little bit further in terms of the impact of this incident on our work?
Yeah, it's a call out. I guess I'll start in calling out all US based businesses, regardless of your vertical, your business size, whatever revenues that you are doing. Two words that are very powerful in our industry is fiduciary responsibility. for a company. And what I mean by that is that a corporation has a responsibility to protect the interests of their clients, protect the interests of their employees, protect the interests of the finances that are associated with the business. And if every organ, if there's an organization, mainstream news, and doesn't take a pause at least to say, okay, what do we do? This is a strong thing to say. I find it negligent. I find it negligent at this point. And, we think in cybersecurity, okay, if I'm going to do something, then I have to go get my Gartner report and go to top right Gartner and buy every tool there, or I need to, buy things. It's like, no, there are simple things that you can do. I mean, getting a CEO getting on an all hands call today and saying, listen, this is a real threat to our business, to our country, to our nation. Here are basic things that we can do. That costs nothing but time. And it's just a business responsibility. Somebody pointed that out. I think it was Chris or Rashay. We're no longer in a technical thing. This is not a zeros and ones issue. Now we're talking about, like Jonathan said, being without power for a week and trying to support our family's efforts, not for, again, getting on TikTok or Facebook or Twitter or ordering DoorDash or an Uber. We're talking about their basic needs for survival. How do I get my 4 kids nourishment in their body? How do I get my 4 kids and wife water that sustains them? And so, it's really time we started taking this much more seriously as a collective. You don't have to be a security professional, like you said, Jonathan, but looking at this as a basic life piece of it, and really starting to, again, not go overboard, but to be, the saying goes, be gentle as a dove and shrewd as a serpent. You have to be alert to the dangers that we have out there today.
Totally agree. Uh, Guys, as I think about this situation, a number of questions continues to go through the mind in terms of, is this, I mean, a recurring decimal? Is this a question of poor third party vendor risk, vulnerability, or patch management problem? I mean, as the attack methodology change, or are we not applying cybersecurity best practices at all levels of our processes? I mean, you're all free to, I mean, jump on this, whichever one of
Yeah.
you want to attack this.
So, this question reminds me of growing up, we used to get the story about the 3 little pigs, right? One piggy had his house with straw, one had sticks, and one had bricks, right? And Big Bad Wolf came and he huffed and puffed and blew the house down. The one with the brick was like, he was okay because he did what he could. The only challenge with that is, if you extend that analogy into cybersecurity, the big bad wolf now has a jackhammer, he has guns, he has grenades, he has all the artillery that he needs at his disposal to blow up and infiltrate that brick house. So back to the point of that Paul kind of mentioned at the beginning is resilience, right? So the little piggy now has grown up and has kids, right? So that little piggy should have taught his kid, like, hey, we have to build a bunker. You have to be aware when you see something with like 4 legs and scrawny teeth. Be on the alert. Be on the lookout, right? Do you have ADT or do you have some kind of alert system? I mean, I love that analogy because when you have a highly motivated actor with resources at their disposal, and these are people with PhDs, right? And they have an objective. You don't, as someone who's defending against that, you don't bury your head in the sand, right? But you have to think of tactical measures, right, that you need to employ for when the Armageddon hits. Right? So I think extending that analogy, we just have to, like Paul said, bring awareness, right? And I'm pretty sure Jonathan is like, yep, we did this stuff in the military. And he's probably more well versed at that. But I think it's just building that resilience muscle and being able to say, you know what, it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if, or is it actually happening? And what can we do to stay resilient, to survive the wolf? Do we need to like set traps outside, right? Honeypots or canaries? But there are things that we can do. And I don't want to, I don't want to say, yes, it's third party because I don't, as a security industry, I don't want to take the stand of like the Monday morning quarterback. Hey, if I was me, I would have drew detection and I would have had to. No matter what you do, the wolf is going to come, right? So I think it should give us pause, however, to just take a step back and say, what can we learn from this, and how do we become more resilient so that when this does happen again, because it will happen again, we're prepared and we have the resources at our disposal to defend, right, and to continue to defend, right. So that's my perspective.
That's a great point. I would say, that's a very valid point. I mean, I was actually thinking along that line when I was actually going through the document. In that, the bad guys, I mean, they are so organized. They have actually created business models from this. They are dedicated to what they do, and they pull on various talents right across the globe just to show you the cohesiveness of these persons. So instead of persons pointing fingers, looking at vendors, looking at processes, looking at where the faults, looking at all of these things, as you have rightly said, there will always be attacks. The weapons will always improve. The attacks will become more rapid and more impactful. But it's all about resilience. So it's all of us coming together as persons within the community to see how best we can actually devise the various strategies, the approaches, working together to put in the various, legislations. Because all of it starts with having the support at the highest level, governance coming right down within our various jurisdictions to enforce all that is required to see to it that we have the necessary, what you would say, fighter power or artillery in place to defend and to be as resilient as best as possible. So yeah, that's definitely important. Um, Paul, or Jonathan, do you have any significant point that actually came out from the article that you would want to, make reference to?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to go with what Chris was saying, in the military. Sorry, going back to that, but yeah, do you know why the military does so many exercises? Is so that way when the time hits, we know exactly what to do. Um, you know, I think I've read it. I was never in special forces or anything, but I think I've read that like those who are Green Berets, those who are Navy SEALs, they'll spend months rehearsing over and over for one single operation that where they're taking down something big, right? They'll spend months perfecting what they do so that way when the time comes, they know exactly where each of their teammates are, what each of their teammates' responsibilities are, and how they're moving about, that objective. And I love how Chris was kind of alluding to that, is that as security professionals, as companies, are we being resilient in those type of practices? Are we doing exercises often to know that when something happens, right? Is one time a year good enough to do IR response simulation, or a business continuity or disaster recovery? Is one time a year good enough? Is 1 month or one time a month good enough to do your vulnerability scanning, right? A lot of these compliance frameworks that people like to go after, whether it's SOC 2, ISO 27001 or whatever, right? They're very basic benchmarks. Those should be like the minimum benchmarks. And in it, it's, hey, are you doing a quarterly type of scanning of your vulnerabilities, right? Are you patching once a month, right? Is that really enough, right? Technology is getting better. Those threat actors are getting better, right? Now that we have new AIs coming out, that's really improving the threat actors' abilities to attack us. are those minimum bars good enough to ensure that we're having good resilience in our systems, or do companies need to go back and review their policies or procedures, right? I do act as a third party assessor within one of these critical infrastructures, right? So I'm relatively new. I've definitely been kind of biting back on some of their old processes and asking, why aren't we doing more? I've kind of gone through a little bit more when I'm doing my assessments, probably more than what they recommend I should. But I want to make sure that the services that I'm looking at are ones that I can understand the risk and make sure that the risk is sufficient for the company and the organization, to make sure that we're not going to open up a door through a cloud service to come and attack us, right? So go back, as for companies, review your policies, your procedures. Is it good enough to be able to make sure that you're staying ahead with these threat actors? I don't think there's ever going to be I don't think there's ever going to be we're going to be ahead of them. We're always going to be lagging somehow, because they're always getting those new technologies. If we were ahead of the threat actors, we wouldn't have anything to really worry about. The best we could do is try to keep up with them. So are companies doing what they can to make sure they keep up with these threat actors?
Very valid points there. And one of the ironic things about this is that as soon as we have new technologies, new processes, uh, new processes in the industry, then we recognize that there goes more vulnerabilities. There goes more 0 days. That's one of the things. So you improve, you had more technology, but within those technologies, then you have so many loopholes that the APT groups are waiting for us. Ironically, we are the ones, the good guys, who are putting in these things, and these guys are just sitting, waiting for us to see what tool, what software are we putting out, so that they can actually dive into these things to see how well they can actually use these to their advantage. So it definitely speaks to our ability to be aware, keep abreast with all that is happening, and for sure, resilience, as you have actually said before, reinforcing the point of resilience within the organization. So, guys, any final points on this as we are down to the 2 last minutes?
I think the one thing that was mentioned by Chris and Jonathan is the fact that these are highly motivated enemies of the state. And, we get very, leery of saying that. But, there's a lot of motivation to attack the states and to gain billions of dollars and to cause havoc, thus elevating the position of the nation state that's attacking. And I don't think we look at it that way. I think we think, oh, it's just Matthew Broderick. I saw Project X, so it's Matthew Broderick that's nice smiley face that's attacking me, and or an actor. No, these are hardcore people that have every reason to stay up 18, 20 hours at a pop to try to get financial gain and to cause chaos, onshore chaos for us. So that would be my final retort here, is for people to understand, these are people that want to harm you. These are people that want to harm your families. And even, just because it's through technology or connectivity doesn't make it any less dangerous than it is if someone has actual weapons of war associated with that.
Agreed, 100%. And that's why they're called advanced persistent threat, right? They're coming, and we need to be prepared. And to your point, I think we start by educating ourselves, being aware of the threat, and prepare for it, right? Disaster preparedness should be at the top of our list, not just as organizations, but as families, as individuals. Two books I'd recommend folks read. One is called The 100-Year Marathon. The second one is Sandworm. That'll give you a perspective in terms of the war that we're in, right? The next war, I think World War III, my prognostication is World War III, it will not be a kinetic war. It's going to be a cyber war. And hopefully we won't get to that point. But if there were to be a war, I think cyber is going to play a critical role. All right. It's going to be less kinetic. It's going to be more attack on critical infrastructures and things that we depend on. Because once you start hurting the population in that way, it's really going to change the dynamics of the war. So that's my 2 cents. I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, I think as you said, Chris, it's going to be more of a cyber war. It's not going to be something that's fought on the other side of the world where the regular civilian is not being affected. They're not going to feel any effects of it. As the technology evolves, as we become more involved and bring technology in our lives, these cyber warfares are going to affect our daily lives and how we go about our typical routines. So it's good to make sure that you're paying attention to your cyber hygiene, right? Change your passwords, very easy stuff. Make sure you're doing your scans in your personal network too, right? Run your antivirus, check it. As I've said a few times before in previous weeks, teach your family about how to make sure that they're watching what they're looking and getting on the internet on, make sure what they're clicking on. But also, start thinking ahead. How can you prepare yourself as a family to, what can you do to take care of yourself, right? Me and my wife joke that she has her little doomsday, chest box. You have solar panel stuff, solar lights. You just have things prepared for in cases like that. We've been through some of these experiences where we've lost power, we've lost water. I tell you what, it's not fun trying to, flush the toilet without water pressure. It can be done. But, it's things that you learn and take into, your little toolbox of knowledge of preparing yourself to take care of your family. Because in the end, that's really what matters is, what are you doing to take care of your family and making sure that, their needs are met.
Yeah, that's a very critical, vital point that you have actually mentioned. And for sure, guys, all the insight that you have actually shared is something for all of us to think about in terms personally as well as how best we can actually help organizations to actually develop the culture within the organization and also to have the necessary mechanisms in place to ensure that we are as resilient in light of all these challenges that exist within the cybersecurity space. So, guys, there you have it. That's a wrap in 30 minutes. See you next week, same time, same place for uh, future conversations as it relates to the cutting edge um, happenings within cybersecurity and GRC.
Great
Bye.
conversation, guys. This was excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your insight.
Definitely
Awesome.
enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Guys,
Cheers. Take care, guys.
Bye.
wonderful
Bye.
just up there.